Welcome to 86 Special, hosted by me, Hernan Stutzer. I have worked in the restaurant business for the last 30 years. I have gone from being a dishwasher in the dish pit until my fingers prune. I have gone from being a busser, a waiter, and now I have become a restaurant owner. I have created this podcast to talk to people in the industry because I want to know their stories, their struggles, their wins, and everything in between. These are people that have been in the mud day in and day out, trying to do their best for their clients. These are stories that you won't find on the menu.
I believe that cooking saved my life. I believe that getting into restaurants, getting that first job, back in Jacksonville, Florida is where I'm from. And so, getting that first job, with the path that I was on, it kind of helped give me a purpose, sense of place. I went in the house. We got to get you out of here, And my son was in pre-kindergarten at the time, and so he was 5 years old. They had a project they had to do at school, and the project was you need to draw a picture of your house, and you need to put everything in the house that you love. And I wasn't in the house.
Blue sky, sunshine, coffee and you. How does it feel like I already knew? You in a past life, it's 1:45. How did it happen? Clock can't be true.
86 Special. Chef Danny, thank you so much for being on episode 2 of 86 Special. It is a treat to have you on. We've been trying for a little bit to have you, and we're so blessed to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to be treating this podcast kind of like a menu, if you would. Starting with an amuse-bouche, going to appetizer, main course, and dessert.
Smart.
Okay. So on the first section, we reached out to some of the fellow chefs you have shared kitchens with. And these are some of the things they had to say about you. Chef Daniel Zeal is known for exceptional contributions to our culinary team. He's not only an extraordinarily skilled chef, but also a dedicated mentor whose influence resonates throughout our kitchens. His depth of knowledge, precision, and creativity consistently elevate the dining experience at Sea Island. Danny is one of the most knowledgeable, talented, and loyal individuals that I know. His ability to mentor and raise chefs makes him perfect for his role at Sea Island.
That's very humbling.
What else can you tell me about Chef Danny Zeal?
I'm a complicated guy. I can be my own worst enemy at times. I am very decisive when I'm managing what I have to manage in front of me, what I've been tasked with. But with layering in the complexities of things, those decisions and how some of those situations will manifest, right? Can take me off my rails, and I can kind of chase things down a rabbit hole. So I tend to want to know everything about everything. I would use the word or inject the word technician. That was one of the best compliments ever paid to me by one of my mentors, Scott Crawford, who has an unbelievable restaurant empire in Raleigh right now and is doing phenomenal things. Scott gave me my first chance, and Scott referred to me in one of my first reviews with him as a technician. And I think that what we do and how we break things down, and the craft of cooking, I think technique and technical merit really showcase themselves. And I think that that's something that most people don't know, is something that I take very seriously. And when I don't know something, I'll go to the end of the earth to figure it out and become an expert in it before I'll turn around and implement it. And that comes with some sacrifice and other things that go along with. But I think that would be one of the things there.
Would you say that you're your own worst boss?
Absolutely.
In what sense?
I'm very results oriented. Always have been, and I think that when you're not achieving what you're capable of achieving, that can kind of put you in a place where you feel like you're not moving things along. But I think if I make a mistake, fool me once, I'll make it once. I'll never make it again. Because I'm not going to allow myself the opportunity to go down that path again. And I think that it's a strength and a weakness. but definitely I'm very hard on myself. I expect greatness for myself. I think that that's been, bred into me. My parents are both very successful, extremely hardworking. My wife is very hardworking and has been successful. And, I think that I've chosen to operate at, call it the top millionth of a % of hotels and restaurants. And there's a level of expectation that comes along with that. And I don't ever take that for granted.
So you would definitely say that started at home with mom and dad.
It did, for sure. Absolutely. The straight A's was an expectation. School was work. There was no work, I had a great upbringing, unbelievable childhood, but, I was one of four, and, so I struggled a little bit to be seen at a point in my life, and, took myself down the wrong path a little bit, and, was a challenging teen. And, I tell people all the time that I believe, nobody else would say this out loud, but I believe that cooking saved my life. I believe that getting into restaurants, getting that first job, back in Jacksonville, Florida is where I'm from. And so, getting that first job, with the path that I was on, and it kind of helped give me a purpose, sense of place, and a perceived value in what I could bring to a team. And that was a really interesting time in my life where, I was super, super inspired. And, there wasn't as much information available. And so, being able to go through the process of seeking out information and going places and traveling and doing all of those things, and then being able to go in and play and tinker and, enjoy the results of whatever you were doing, I think was really an interesting thing. That I was always very artistic, and so food became my medium. And I went all in, I burned the boats. And that was just, as soon as I made that conscious decision, my life changed 180 degrees.
Anybody else in your family work in a kitchen?
No. My father's a retired neurosurgeon. My older brother's a general surgeon. My middle brother is a nurse in acute care in Mayo Clinic. And so, just me.
So how do they take, neurosurgeon, medicine? How do they take one of their kids going into the culinary world?
Out of the gates, when I said, hey, I think I want to do this, my mom, was pretty much the one who really kind of drove the fact that, hey, look, 10% of restaurants succeed, 90% of restaurants fail. This is going to be a really tough life. I don't think you should do that. And, for a little while through college, I was trying to find my way and find my place, attending, Florida State College of Jacksonville, taking, core classes and curriculum, and being bored to death sitting in a classroom. And I started cooking for a catering company. I had been working for the Firehouse Restaurant Group for a while. I worked for Robin and Chris Sorensen, directly the former owners of Firehouse Subs, at their first unit, and then kind of grow a little bit. And the connection of, guest interaction, what I was capable of producing, building, you mentioned loyalty earlier, building some loyalty with them and trust. Being given trust to execute, and those things were all really meaningful to me, and I could move a needle. So I didn't walk in my graduation. I graduated from college, didn't walk in my graduation. Diploma came in the mail. I packed my things, I got in the car, and I moved to New York. I went to the Culinary Institute of America 2001, and that was it. That was the moment. I'm going to leave everything that I know. I'm going to leave 100% of what's comfortable, and I'm going to go and I'm going to go all in.
That's amazing. I can absolutely relate to that. I think that hearing what you have to say about how you were brought up, I can only imagine what it was like going into the CIA with these guys and at the level that the CIA requires.
It was the best.
Correct. It
was one campus with, at the time, 18 certified master chefs teaching. And so for me, it was a no-brainer. I went up, I did a stage for the day. Mm-hmm. I spent the day in the kitchens there and watched and learned, and I knew exactly that was where I belonged. Yeah. 100%.
So we're going to be moving into the appetizer section now of the podcast. I'm going to be showing you some photographs, and I just want you to tell me first thing that comes to mind when you see them.
Okay. Ooh, potato latkes. So it's a complicated one to answer short and sweet, but those little nuggets of gold are such a heartwarming thing for me and my family, to be able to share that with my family.
Does that translate into family, grandma?
100%. 100%. My father's parents unfortunately passed, when I was relatively young. My grandmother I spent a little bit more time with, but they lived in Manitoba, so we were in Florida. Mm-hmm. We saw them once a year, twice a year. So we didn't get a lot of time, maybe the time that we would have wanted to have, right, circumstantially. And when Hanukkah was here and we made potato latkes, and my mom executed my grandmother's recipes, I think that flavor, that taste, that crunch, the sound in your ear, all of it, the whole thing, smelling the oil, cooking the potatoes in the kitchen, I mean, all of it is nostalgia.
Who makes the best in your family?
Me, by far. I've taken all of the things that made them sometimes not as good as they could have been, and tried to eliminate all of those variables and playing with the starches and things of that nature. But if I ask my kids, what's one thing that I make that's the best thing that you've eaten, and they would say potato latkes by far.
Might have to try them.
They're really good.
All right, moving on to photo number 2.
Young man, kid. That was probably, I would say those are some of the best years of my life.
How so?
That period of time, everything from getting married, getting engaged, finding a place, building an identity as a chef, right?
What year is this?
This would have been probably 2009, 2010. So, post-economic downturn, mm-hmm. post-housing crisis. And so the individual there was an amalgamation of my mentors, breaking out of that mold and finding his sense of place. And that's a really difficult thing that not a lot of people talk about. I think you represent the people who trained you, and you reflect the lessons that you've learned, and you try and apply those things to the plate in a way that's creative, that isn't over-chefed, but that the guests really experience. And that was 2012. I went and did a James Beard dinner, and I think that whole period between 2010, 2012, the birth of both of my kids, mm-hmm. I would say that was the peak of my career as an individual chef running a restaurant, at the best that I was cooking, the best that I was leading, the best that I was teaching. I tell people all the time, when it first happens and they make you a manager or they make you a sous chef, you're the worst version of yourself by far. And this was just a time where all cylinders were firing. I was very inspired. I was very inspired by my team. My leadership style was changing, and I believe we were cooking the best food that we could possibly produce. And I think as a chef, you look for validation somewhere, right? Whether it's the guest in your restaurant, whether it's a mentor that comes and eats and you get to pay it forward, mm-hmm. and show the respect and take care of somebody. I think there's moments where, for me, there's a picture on my desk in my office. It's a picture of myself and my parents in the grill room kitchen. They dined in the chef's table, and that was the first time they experienced me cooking. Not cooking dinner at home, but what hospitality meant to me.
How powerful was that?
Pretty powerful. I get pretty emotional when mm-hmm. I think about it, right? I think that validation is something that we search for. I think that it's important, and I think the validation that I was receiving at the time was a lot of high praise, not as much failure as I experienced earlier in my career, and mm-hmm. And it was probably the most fun that I was having, and having a family and finding out how to balance those things, and trying to be super dad on the weekends, and then super chef during the week. And it was really, really challenging time for me, but I love a good challenge, and my wife is amazing and helped me through all of that. Sending me videos of every day, not once a week, but every day, 2 to 3 videos a day of what my son was doing or what my daughter was doing, and it was really, really incredible and helpful for me to be able to stay and keep the focus that I needed to keep to be able to achieve at the level that we were achieving, which was, we were chasing 5 stars. So
we were just chatting off camera that it does take a specific type of wife to, be able to put up basically with what we do, being in the restaurant for so many hours, birthday parties, we miss Christmas, New Year's, you name it, right? We're not home.
That's right.
So being able to balance all of that, it does, take a toll.
Yeah, I think sacrifice is, I said it earlier, sacrifice is the thing that people don't understand. We, and I think that's one of the things that's really changed. It's been a difficult thing to adapt to as a leader. People are less willing to embrace the sacrifice. They're not as quick to embrace the sacrifice. They're quick to explain why it's so necessary to be at this birthday or so necessary to be at that wedding. I can't remember a birthday that I didn't work. I can't remember. I can only remember a few weddings that I attended as a chef. One of them was my best friend from diapers. One of them was my brother. One of them was my other brother, right? And so those are really, really intimate. My wife was just in Buffalo at a wedding, and I was here, and I was working, running a resort. And that's something that sacrifices, it hits hard, it's lonely sometimes. And I think that, if you don't have a good partner, right, that helps you navigate some of those things, it can become, a little bit of a challenging thing to navigate, for sure.
We're very blessed.
We are. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Moving to photo number 3.
This was a fun trip. So this picture is taken on the steps of the Culinary Institute of America, and on the left is Daniel Home, and to the left of me, looking at the picture to my right, is Colin Bedford. Colin Bedford is a 6'4" British chap. He's an unbelievable chef, funny, charming, talented, really unbelievable. And so this was. I transitioned out of restaurants in 2015 with our company, and I moved into to take over as the executive chef of the Lodge Hotel, and it's a boutique hotel under 100 rooms. And I talked about goal setting a little bit earlier. Just referenced it, but goal setting is important. I said I would work in a 5-star restaurant. We created a 5-star restaurant, Scott Crawford. With my support, and our team, and then I said, at some point, 10 years into my career, at least, I want to be the executive chef of a boutique hotel under 100 rooms. And so round number 2, I achieved that. There was a few moments that, and I talked a little bit about the sacrifice, and it would behoove me to make sure that I reference, the reason why I transitioned out of Georgian Room. And, Jonathan, my boss, was really adamant that, you need to develop, you need to grow. And I was pretty confident and comfortable. And he wanted to get me out of my comfort zone. And so for a year and a half, 2 years, he was begging me, you got to transition out. You got to go do something else. We got to get you out of here, And my son was in pre-kindergarten at the time, and so he was 5 years old. They had a project they had to do at school, and the project was you need to draw a picture of your house, and you need to put everything in the house that you love. And I wasn't in the house. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, so so I walked him into school every day. Dog was in the house, baby sister was in the house, mom was in the house, toys were in the house. I wasn't in the house. So I walked in, and the teacher pulls me outside because I walked him into class every day. It was a requirement. And so, I walk him in and get him in, and the teacher chases me down the hall and says, "Hey, I need to show you something, and I want to explain." So she shows me the picture of the house, and she said this was the project, and she hand wrote in a note to the side that said, "My dad's at work," and that hit pretty hard.
Yeah.
So I remember I drove in, sat in my car for a minute, and I walked right into Jonathan's office, and I just said, "You've been asking me for 2 years. Strike while the iron's hot," and I told him the story, and pretty heartbreaking, obviously, my dad was never at the house. My dad was always at work, right? And that's what we do. It's a sacrifice that we pay. But so circling back to my experience, so that opened the door for me to transition to the Lodge, and I got the opportunity to go there. And we were, at the time, a Relais and Chateau hotel, which is a really great distinction. We were very honored for that. And so I got to go on a Relais and Chateau trip with other Relais and Chateau chefs. So, I mean, we had Patrick O'Connell, Jacques Pepin, Daniel Hume, Colin Bedford, Barbara Lynch. I mean, like, some of the best minds, Gary Danko. I mean, some of the best players in the game. So I spent 2 days in upstate New York with those guys, lunch at Blue Hill at Stone Barn, sitting with, Patrick on one side and Jacques Pepin on the other, and Colin across from me, and we're breaking down the food and we're talking about it. It was just such an immersive, connected experience. It was really, really cool. And it's not operating now, but at the time, Blue Hill was one of the premier
Absolutely
places in the world. And Dan Barber was a phenom. I mean, just a machine, absolute machine, who was just changing the game and really defining at the time and for years, what farm to table actually meant.
correct.
I think that's the responsible thing to do. So we never really beat that drum. But Patrick actually invited me to come and stay at the inn at Little Washington on that trip. And, I talk about mentors and I talk about people who impact your life. Patrick invited me, and so I took him up on his invitation. I went and I stayed with Colin at the Farrington house where he was at the time. And then I went up to the inn at Little Washington, and they put us in the Thomas Keller suite, my wife and I, and we just had such an enjoyable 2-day experience there. We went to go check out and pay, and the person looked at me and said, "Your money's no good here. Patrick's taking care of your stay." Patrick was there at Sunday night at 11 o'clock, waiting in his kitchen to welcome us back to tour the kitchen, on a Sunday night at 11 o'clock, 30 years in, as longest standing 5-star restaurant and hotel in North America at the time. Unbelievable. I mean, that's hospitality.
That is.
Really impactful trip. Really, really impactful.
Moving on to the last photo.
Mentorship. This was taken in Auburn, Alabama. We had an opportunity to go up, and I had an opportunity to take over and teach a class and teach fish cookery and whatnot up there with their program. So they have the Horst Schulze School of Hospitality and Culinary School, and we've got a few people that we've hired from that program. Great program, really doing some great things. Really impressive, the commitment that they've made. And mentor something that's followed me for my entire career. And, I reference an awful lot, meaningful, defining moments and what those mentorship moments mean. And without those moments, without mentorship, without guidance, without somebody driving me to achieve what I've said I wanted, and being in your corner, to lift you up and standing in front of you and saying, you shouldn't have done that way, and really helping to develop you. I mean, we owe everything to the people who helped us to achieve what we've achieved. And the best mentors and the best people, hold their people accountable to what they want, not what you want for them. And I think that that's an important thing.
Do you remember the moment that you actually fell in love with cooking?
I don't know if I remember the moment where I actually fell in love with cooking. I think there's a few moments in my career, starting back when I was working at Firehouse, and I was standing next to the owners, and those guys were working 60 hours a week, 6 days a week, 10-hour days, and one of them was actually a fireman at the time, so he was going to the firehouse, and he was actually like 24 on, 48 off, and doing this on his days when he was there, and I remember Robin picking up on, I remember that guy. I remember what he ordered last time. Hey, I remember what you ordered last time. You loved it. You came and you said how good you want it. Do you want me to get another one? The line was long. So we'd get, he started preparing their food beforehand, and that person just took priority over the people who had been there for the first time. And I think that was a meaningful moment. I think, there's a defining moment in my time in my internship at the Ritz, and at that point in my career, I went from being, when I was cooking in my early career, I didn't have that brash confidence. I was still figuring things out. And at some point along the road, I had a epiphany and a full-blown 180 for my life. I dropped 35 pounds. I was in the gym 2 hours a day. I was working 50 hours a week, going to school, lifting, doing all those things, and changed everything. And then when I went to school, while everybody was partying and having a good time, I was in the basement tying tenderloins and breaking down chickens and working for free with the LITs at school. And, so I invested a lot of extra time in myself. And so by the time I started my internship, I was maybe recklessly confident. And I think having that reckless confidence was good and bad. Landed me in some hot water a couple of times in my career. But there's a moment where a chef out of Jacksonville, Matthew Bedour, who's been a good friend and a mentor for me, and Scott Crawford again, we worked together at the Ritz. Matthew was mentoring Scott, and I was in the cafe, and I had created a special, and those guys they would go every day at 4:30, and they would get a coffee in the cafe, and then they would walk back across to the grill room, which was like the elite of the elite. They were the Green Berets, they were the Black Ops guys, and they ran harder than anybody else in the business at that point. And I had put a special up, and they came over and said, there's a lot of layers in that dish that you've prepared, are each of them cooked properly and whatnot. And I looked up and I said, not properly, perfectly. And so I'll never forget the look that Scott gave me, which was, only God can help you, And so he pulls out of his back pocket a little offset cake spatula, and he set it on top of the little stacked item that I had, and he just starts pushing it through, waiting for it to catch up on something on the way down so he can just lace me. And he didn't. He didn't get hung up. But I think those little moments of mentorship and giving the opportunity and chance, and I think that moment is the reason why Scott was like, I think I can hire this kid.
Nice.
And if he doesn't, I don't come back to work there after I graduate. I don't sneak my wife into a bar. She spent the night, never left. Ultimately, my whole life trajectory, everything changes, right? And so I tell people all the time, I don't believe in luck, but I do have faith, and I think that talent has to meet opportunity. Great mentors understand when talent has met opportunity, and how to capitalize on that currency, to be able to help whatever the situation is, whether it's their own restaurant and their own interest as a chef, to put somebody in there who can just be a driver, or to develop them into something great, And I think mentoring has probably been the most rewarding thing for me individually, and giving back to those kids, showing them the difference between a scallop that came out of the freezer and a scallop that was dry packed, hand picked, hand harvested, and the taste between the two, and watching their eyes light up like, oh my God, what have I been missing? Those are the moments that I think are the most gratifying.
How do your roots actually show up on the plate?
So a little bit of everything that I do is reflectant of a few different things. So my roots, my childhood, my grandmother, my mom's mom, she baked bread until she was 99 years old, and every day. And so that having fresh, warm baked bread is important to me. It's not important to everybody. Go to Danielle in New York. It's cold bread. It's really delicious, but it's cold. And it's on a tray, and they bring it to the table, and it's beautifully presented, perfectly executed. But I have a thing and a soft spot for fresh baked bread right out of the oven that's just come down to enough temperature where it's warm enough to still melt the butter, and I think that that's important. So I capitalize on little moments like that. I think I ran a restaurant that I took over breakfast at some point, and I told we win with grits and oatmeal, because it's the one thing that somebody's probably cooked for themselves at some point in their life, and it has to be better than what they've produced. And so I've taken those basic principles of the things that I learned at home. My travels as a child. My parents, I'm grateful for it, but they put us on planes and shipped us off to summer camps, and that we had to interview for. But we got in, and I went to Sweden when I was 11 years old, and I walked out into the backyard of the family that received us from the airport and got us situated and settled, and dill growing in the backyard, getting hit by the early morning sun, and that smell, it's inflected in my food, and you can see it, and I have an affinity for it where not everybody does. Not everybody loves it, right? And so I build a connection with those flavors, from my travels, and I went to Israel, and I've been able to experience some cool things. I went on a escapade to Mexico City with one of my mentees, who wanted to show me his city, and like I've never used the ingredients that I use now before that trip, and I think that along the way you pick up on things that you like and that you believe are great, and you kind of just put them in your bag of tricks. And I think that the cool thing about food is doesn't matter what language you speak, you can build connection through food 100%. And through unbelievable food, and it doesn't have to be complicated to be unbelievable.
So on that note, what do you cook at home for your kids and wife?
If I asked the question to them, what do you want to eat tonight? My son wants grilled chicken and rice, and he just thinks that the grilled chicken that I make is the best in the world.
Wow,
okay. Simple stuff. But I've got a wood burning pizza oven. I love there's a new show called Life of Fire. And I'll reference that. Pat Martin's unbelievable. But the cooking over live fire, I think is really cool. So I've got a wood burning pizza oven. So we love making pizzas. We make pasta. We make things from scratch sometimes. When we have the opportunity to dine as a family, right? The chicken piccata is one of those things that if you ask my wife what's the best thing he can make, and she'll say well, I don't know if it's the best thing he can make, but I wanted to make chicken piccata because it's meaningful. It's one of those things from early on in our relationship. But I like to experiment, and then, my kids are pretty simple eaters. They're very textural, which is the thing now. I didn't have a choice. I feel like a short order cook sometimes, but I think that the simple things are good, but being able to expand their and broaden their horizon. Add a little bit of Vietnamese here, and add a little bit of Asian there, or, Chinese here, Japanese influence. My daughter loves sushi, so she's like, "Can we make sushi?" Yeah, let's do it.
How cool.
Let's build a connection over something, right? And food's important for us. We're not a traditional family. My kids are both in travel sports. My wife's a retired pastry chef, and and I'm running a resort with 15 businesses that I'm overseeing, and 300 employees, and it becomes a lot to manage. So we usually do one day a week, and typically it's outdoor cooking. That's really where we find our most joy.
You mentioned earlier about seeking perfection pretty much most of the time when you're in the kitchen. What would you say the technique that took you the longest to truly master?
I think simplicity, actually. Not so much a technique, but maybe a philosophy. If you go into my office and you look up at the top of my wall, there's kind of a wall of an evolution of food photos that I've taken over the years, and it goes from 12 and 15 ingredients with all kinds of techniques, and sous vides and fluid gels, and force marination and mechanical breakdown, chemical breakdown, all of those different things. And then you go to the end, and there's a picture of like a piece of fish on succotash, right? And it's like, that's harder. Mm-hmm. That's harder because there's less on the plate. Everything has to be perfect. Tom Colicchio had a quote that lived on our inspiration board a long time ago. It says, when there's little on the plate to obscure the food, mistakes of execution have nowhere to hide. They must be precise, perfect, and true. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think that, finding great ingredients and doing simple things with them, I think has been one of the things that took the longest to master, because you need the experience and the exposure. And the most fun was when we were like recreating, crazy dishes and doing, interesting food and smoke and mirrors and, nitro ice cream tableside, and all that stuff was fun. It was a lot of fun. But I believe that the perfect product, simply produces sometimes the best food. And I think keeping people on the rails too is really difficult. Teaching my chefs, the ones who report to me, not to over chef it. And do you need that 12th ingredient? Do you need that 8th ingredient? Right? Is it necessary, or is it there because you need to make it interesting? Sometimes food just needs to be good.
I wanted to ask you, You've mentioned a few times about working in a resort as exceptional as Sea Island, and I couldn't agree more with it. Having so many different outlets, so many restaurants on property, having guests from all over the world. How do you keep everybody happy?
It's complicated. We're a complicated business model, for sure. I think that you have to start by setting expectations with each of the restaurants, identifying exactly what their purpose is, because I think that having purpose, our goal is to have people not leave the property. We want people to be there all day. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner, 3, 4, 5 days a week. Sometimes 7 or 8 days through their entire duration of their stay, right? And so we want to be able to capitalize on as many experiences as we can. And so diversifying the venues is something that's a collaborative effort in some respects. In some respects, it's been told, this is what we're doing. Okay, we'll do that, and we're going to produce the proper product in that area. And I think sourcing partnerships and ingredients that will deliver on the expectation of the top millionth of a percent of venues or the top 5% global traveler. I think those are things that we absolutely take into consideration. I think we go through a rigorous process of testing the food. And so, the people who report to me have to submit ideas for the seasonal changes. They have to bring metrics, not just a fly-by-wire, I want to change this. It's like, okay, is it a star? Is it a dog? Do you sell a lot? Do you sell a little bit? Is it profitable? Is it not profitable? And everything needs to live in some sort of balance. And I think that teaching that is an important aspect of it, where, make it make sense, right? So
to that point, and moving on to the main course, how important is it to you to use local ingredients on your menus?
I think it's important. I think you should build as many local connections as you can. Sometimes local connections can be frustrating. We live in Georgia. We're in Southeast Georgia. It's sandy soil. The farming's not a big, ag's not a giant thing here in the Southeast. So trying to procure as much, I think being responsible is something. I think also, we should do that. It's something that our guests are expecting. Our guests are also expecting Dover sole, or really beautiful things that are global ingredients. And so I think finding the balance is really important. I think making sure that sustainability is on the mind and on the forefront. We choose partners that can continue to deliver on our business model. What I don't want from a brand loyalty perspective to our guests is to put something in front of them that they fall in love with that they can't get tomorrow. I think that that's an important piece of what we're trying to look for. And, we're building partnerships with different farms in Georgia, in Kentucky, and we've got a lamb producer in Kentucky. We've got a beef producer that we're partnering with, in North Georgia. We've got a Wagyu farm in Kentucky that we're it's regional-ish, right? It's living in this area. We've got different farms in the state of Georgia. We've got farms in Florida. We've got an unbelievable fishery in our backyard. And so capitalizing on that, we've got 3 generations of connections to a local business where we buy all of our shrimp. And so that's an important thing for us. I think that it's the right thing to do, positioning ourselves as a support for the community. But, I'll never forget one of the guests at some point in time, kind of grabbed one of us and kind of walked us, we're talking, chit-chatting, hey chef, come, let's go walk, and we're looking out the back windows of the River Bar, one of our venues, and we're looking at the river there, and he looks at me and he says, "You see any salmon out there?" And it's like, no. He's like, "Why is the special always salmon?" Right? And there was great reasons for it, but I think that was a meaningful thing for us. And so finding a partnership with somebody who can deliver sustainable local fish and wild fish is important.
So you've been talking about ingredients and different ingredients. If you were to be taken to an island and you had to take 3 ingredients and 3 ingredients only, what are you taking and what are you cooking?
Man, that's a good question. I think first and foremost, I grew up in a pretty humble household, so taking 3 ingredients is easy and complicated. My favorite food growing up and the food that maybe changed my perspective. You asked the question earlier, and the food that changed my perspective that food could be really exciting was Chinese. And so, obviously that's out, right? But we did a lot of steak and potatoes, a lot of grill. My dad's a really interesting eater, and wants to do interesting things, but is a creature of comfort. And so I think my wife and I, we both kind of come from kind of meat and potatoes, grinding type families. And so steak, potatoes, and I would have to have really good butter. I'm a huge fan of just unbelievable, delicious butter. And so whether it's butter from Iceland or, Lurpak from Denmark or Beurre de Rot from France, I mean, like whatever it is, I think that, butter would be necessary for sure. Probably the most key ingredient.
Very nice. So professionally speaking, who's been the biggest influence on you?
I would say, professionally speaking, from a chef cooking perspective, by far Scott Crawford has been the biggest impact on my life. He gave me my first shot. He took a shot on me and fought for me when people doubted my ability or doubted that I could do what he believed that I was capable of. He texts me all the time. When we text, he always finishes up at some point with like, "I'm really proud of you. I'm really proud of you." Right. And inversely, I'm beyond proud of him. Right. Obviously, for all the things he's done, and I'm beyond grateful. I think gratitude's super important. But I think my immediate boss, Jonathan Jerusalem, has been one of the largest influences in my life. I think I like to think that my family actually has impacted him as a leader. He's watched my kids grow up. When he first showed up on the scene, we were in a bankruptcy. We weren't in the best of standing at that point. He came in to kind of help turn everything around, and who he's become as a leader has molded and shaped me as a leader. And I think you mentioned earlier trust and loyalty and in the comments, and I agree that I'm a very loyal individual, but I'm only loyal to the people who are loyal to me. Mm-hmm. And I understand very clearly who's in my circle. And JJ has been an incredible influence on my life. I have done the work. He has helped open the doors in a lot of ways, and believed in me. And I think that Scott believed in me. Another mentor in my life, Robert Siborowski, who's the culinary director at the Hard Rock Hotel, down in Fort Lauderdale. Robert believed in me, and having people through your career who believe in you, I think, and knowing you've got a camp on your side that just is giving you the opportunity to go after what you believe in and what you want, is really, really important.
So you talk about all these people that believed in you. What kind of process do you follow to hire new kitchen staff?
So I look for two things primarily in those individuals. One, I ask a question which, tell me a story of when you had to go through something that was really difficult, because I need to gauge the level of perseverance in an individual. Mm-hmm. I think that perseverance is a really important trait and characteristic that if you're going to be a chef, you're going to have to persevere through a lot of stuff, right? We talked about the sacrifice. That's just one little small snippet of things that you need to persevere through. But I think we can teach people the technique. We can teach people how to mold flavors. We can provide tools to help people to map and blueprint food that's delicious. I think you have to have the heart of a teacher. And if you can't articulate that you have the heart of a teacher, a chef is not the best cook in the kitchen. I always tell the guys, I've been saying this for years, the strongest leader in any business isn't the one who can lift the car. They're the one who can convince 10 weaklings that they can lift the car. And you've got to have somebody who can just rally a group of individuals to a cause, right? And if you don't have somebody that's willing to sacrifice their time for their people, it's just not going to work. It's just not going to work. The carrots are unemotional. You can just go in the corner and cook and manipulate the food because it doesn't talk back. It doesn't have an emotion. It doesn't have bills to pay. It's not motivated by fame, or it's not motivated by money. And big turnoff for me is people who are chasing recognition. Because I think people who chase recognition, and we were chit-chatting earlier, and I talked about looking internally. I chased recognition, and then I won the award, and then I woke up the next day and it was just another day, and the hangover became over, from whatever it was, and the celebration and everything else, and then okay, yeah, on to day 366. Starting year over again. Day one, 365 days of excellence follows. What are you going to do? How are you going to manage it? And it feels really great for a short period of time, and then Alex Hormozy has a really great quote that basically that you've already achieved the things that you said would make you happy, and that resonates really, really strongly with me. And with when we're looking at that, if you're chasing recognition, that's just not what I'm looking for in a chef. You will be recognized for great work. Are you chasing great work? Are you chasing great leadership? Are you chasing delicious food that is going to create memories for people and bring families together, right? The cool thing about resorts, box hotels in the city, people walk in the door and they eat breakfast in the morning and you'll never see them again. Mm-hmm. Never. The chances of you seeing somebody as a regular are slim to none, probably less than 1%. Mm-hmm. And and you have a really amazing neighborhood restaurant, and it's a neighborhood restaurant.
Correct.
And you've got a neighborhood, mm-hmm. and you have a neighborhood that supports your mission, mm-hmm. and your product and your food and the hospitality that you provide. Mm-hmm. That's really amazing. On our end, we're trying to plant seeds in families' memory banks. I believe it's a very powerful thing that we have the opportunity to do. And, we get to put seeds in people's memory banks of times and places and sharing and embracing the moment. And, the El Cellar con Roca in the book, there's a little snippet in that book, and I have it highlighted, and it basically says, when people open themselves up to the temptation and seduction of what we have to offer as hospitality professionals and chefs, that's a really delicate thing to manage and navigate. I don't need people who are thinking about themselves in those moments. I need somebody who's going to be thinking about the person who actually pays their salary, the guest who's sitting at the table, in the dining room, who's just waiting for that thing that's going to give them a wow moment, right? And it doesn't have to be complicated, and take them back to that place. We've got a few dishes all over the resort and in each of the restaurants, and each one of them hits differently with somebody different. And, there are things that we just can't take off the menus because they resonate with mm-hmm. so many, and they just become kind of the staple items. And I'm sure you're the same, right? And I think that having people who will capitalize on those moments and embrace them and go after them and chase them, I think is really something that's difficult to impress upon people. You want to do it or you don't. And when you're only thinking about yourself, sometimes you get jaded a little bit and forget about what's really important. And I've done it in my career, mm-hmm. guilty as charged.
Chef, we're going to be moving to the dessert section now. Are you ready for some rapid fire questions?
Let's do it.
All right. Foie gras or truffles?
Foie gras, any day of the week and twice on Sundays.
Farm to table or molecular gastronomy?
Farm to table.
More satisfying plating or tasting?
Plating.
One word to define your cooking style?
Refined Southern. Oxymoron.
Very nice. Worst burn, pan or boss?
Boss.
Okay. I'm really interested. You'll tell me off camera. Service or prep?
Prep.
Most stressful station?
Grill.
Something you won't eat?
Oh, that's a good one. chitlins.
Okay. New York strip or ribeye?
New York strip.
New York strip or skirt steak?
Skirt steak.
Skirt steak or filet mignon?
Skirt steak.
Skirt steak or rack of lamb?
Rack of lamb.
Very good. I agree on that one. Chef, you're going to be taken to another world, a planet far, far away. What's your last meal?
My last meal would be one of two places. It would be at home cooking potato latkes, sitting at the table, enjoying in a moment with my family, or my whole family, past and present, meeting up at Shangri-La in Winnipeg, Manitoba, around a 10-foot round table with a giant Lazy Susan, crushing Chinese food for an hour or two, for sure.
Very interesting. Closing the circle back to the potato latkes, right? Chef, thank you so much for your time. We're delighted to have you on.
I'm super honored. Been a lot of fun. Great chatting with you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
What did you hear out on the street? Why do you care? It's rinse and repeat. Picture can change after feeling some heat. Bubbles and edges raised up on me. Call it a day, call it a night. As long as you call me on time, what would mine be? 86 special back up in lights. Oh,